Hello, my name is Ari. Welcome back to my podcast, Surrounded by Addicts. Here I share my perspective on alcohol and drug addiction as someone who comes from a family of addicts. I share my personal stories, lessons I learned along the way, and take a look at what the research says about addiction. Please enjoy the following episode. Jim's brother, aka my uncle, or who I usually refer to him as, is my drunkle. I call him my drunkle because he is always drunk. I can't remember a time from my childhood to my current age of the big 23 where I was around him sober. So he is drunkle from here on out, and this is Jim's younger brother and his only younger brother. So when I was 13, at some point around that age, my drunkles started to let me take shots with him. I don't remember the exact situation, but I started taking shots with him for the first time when I was 13, and it was probably at some sort of family party, maybe a holiday thing, something where we're at a family event together. This was the first time I started to drink on purpose. I say that because there was a time when I was on a family vacation and I accidentally got drunk. That was not me purposely trying to drink, but that is a story for another time. It was actually kind of funny looking back at it. But so this 13 was when I started to drink on purpose and I was willingly taking, we call them nips, so just like a shot of whatever liquor. We call them nips where I'm from. So he would always buy a sleeve of nips, usually of Fireball. And of course, that's my go to now as an adult. If I want to drink, I usually get shots of Fireball because that's kind of what I grew up on. Not a good thing, not a good thing, but that's the truth. So, despite me being only 13, I always limited myself to one or two shots. I got to learn what the buzzed feeling felt like. And before that, I saw what being shit faced looked like. And I was never really interested in becoming that drunk, especially because of how young I was. I think at that age, I still kind of understood that I didn't want to be like all of the adults around me. Even though I was participating in the same activity that they were doing, I didn't want to do it to their scale. I think my uncle, Drunkle, would have let me have my own sleeve. Like, I think if I asked him to buy me my own sleeve of Fireball, he probably would have. At least at some point, like if I built up to it, I think he would have. But I usually always limited myself to just one or two, might have a third one depending on how long I'm drinking with him for, because like I said, my drunkle, he was a pro. He's a drinker. So he could down nips one right after the other and be semi functioning. That was not the case for me. So I always kept it to a buzz. I didn't I was kind of too nervous to go past that point because I just don't know. I never really wanted to feel what it was like to go past that buzz feeling. Even when I was 21, when I turned 21, I I'm to this day not the biggest drinker. I do not prefer it. But even after I turned 21, it took me until recently to actually get drunk to the point where it was more than just a buzzed feeling. So, when I first started drinking with him, we hid it from everybody. He definitely treated it as more of a shh between us type of thing. He would tell me to hide it or to throw away the nips in the trash and then cover it with more trash, or he would tell me to keep the nips like in his car and he would just throw it away a different time, or if we were like out and about at a family party or an event where it's more expected to stay outside, he would just tell me to keep them in my pocket or something along those lines. At first, like I said, we hid it from everybody. No one really knew. I don't know how long or how much time passed, but eventually I told my mom that Drunkle was letting me drink with him. And she was very conflicted because she didn't want me to drink for very obvious reasons. Even without Jim's history of alcoholism and just my family struggling with addiction in general, I don't think most parents want their child to be out of their sight, completely not knowing and removed from the fact that their child is drinking. So my mom wasn't crazy for not liking that. But she also didn't want to take me away from Jim's side of the family. Even though she knew that I struggled to like my father and I didn't really enjoy my time with him when he was around, she knew that I still had real relationships with the people on his side. So overall, she continued to let me go over there, even though she knew I was probably going to drink, especially if Drunkle was around. I think she let me mainly because I was honest with her, even to the point where if she texted me at 11 p.m. and she knew that I was around my drunkle, and if she asked me if I was drinking, and I would tell her yes. So I was honest with her, and from the time I started drinking to the time when I graduated high school, I never really let my grades slip. School came very easily to me, and she put that as the standard. So if I ever started to slip and it was, or if she thought it was because I was drinking, then that would be changed. But overall, she didn't like it. She was very disappointed that my drunkle did let me drink, and she definitely lectured me a lot about just drinking in general. But I overall didn't care because she was still letting me. I didn't have the guilt of trying to hide it from her. So anytime I would see my drunkle, and at the very least, it was a couple of times a year for just like holidays and stuff like that, we would drink together. Um, I don't know how long it took for Jim's side, like the rest of Jim's side of the family, to figure out that he was letting me drink. I know that we were hiding it from my grandmother the most because, she's the matriarch of the family. My drunkle is a drunk, so she didn't want me to be overly influenced by him. He wasn't going in the best direction, and he is still struggling to go in the right direction. But obviously my grandmother lost her son to alcoholism, so she wasn't too fond of me doing that. And I don't really know when my other aunts or uncles or just anybody else in general started to know, but me and Drunkle did our best. Me under him telling me to do this, but I would do my best to hide the nips, not make it obvious that we were drinking. And I think that also played a role into me not accepting more nips than what I could handle, because I also knew that I didn't want to deal with the consequences of it being obvious that I'm drunk, especially because sometimes I wouldn't be drinking with my uncle at a family party. Sometimes it would just be me visiting my grandmother's house for the weekend, and it's just supposed to be a chill weekend, and then I'm over here getting shit faced. Like, I didn't want to do that. So there's a lot of reasons as to why I didn't overdrink. There's a lot of reasons why my mom let me continue to be around him, and I could list the reasons as to why I did what I did. But at the end of the day, I was a teenager that didn't have to sneak to drink, and I got to bond with my uncle. So it became a lot more routine as time went on. It became pretty much a habit where anytime I would see my drunkle, he would already be getting ready to hand me a nip we would cheers it, and then we would just, down the hatch it would go. It was just kind of normal. Or if I got to my grandmother's house before he was there, usually he would come inside, say hi, and then, hey, you want to come outside? I need to show you something real quick. And he would usually just like give me a nip. So it became very routine. And it wasn't anything that I didn't think it was weird. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was wrong. I knew that just like by law I should not have been drinking. And I knew just from the fact that we were hiding it from the rest of my family that it was wrong, because if it was right, then they wouldn't have a problem with it. But it wasn't until I got to an adult age, or closer to adult age, because I can't exactly remember when I had this realization. But at one point, instead of it being just like a little between us thing, it turned into him replacing Jim with me. Because one thing I need to mention before I go any further is that Jim used to supply my drunkle with booze when my uncle was a teenager. So I feel like my drunkle was trying to carry on that legacy. I was too young to drink. He wanted somebody to drink with. He wanted somebody that could get down to his level. And that's what he wanted. And since my father is now gone, my drunkle needed to fill that void. Because before Jim passed away, that's what they did together. Him, drunkle, and there's an older brother too that he does have a drinking problem, but he does manage it better. But the three of them would get together at family parties and shoot the shit and drink. And it was that bonded them the most. And Jim was the closest brother in age to my drunkle. And the way that, from what I was told, how they grew up, they just bonded the most with each other. So, as you would imagine, when Jim died, drunkle took a big hit. It absolutely destroyed him. He went through a lot of just mental gymnastics working through it. He partially blames himself for it. He has a lot, as you would imagine, issues revolving around just drinking, his relationships with his family members, and all that. So I think he was trying to fill that void by passing it on to me. Jim bought him booze. Jim encouraged drunkle to party when he was too young to do so. Jim used booze as a way to connect because him and my drunkle are over a decade apart in age. So, there was a big age gap that they were trying to bridge. And me and drunkle pretty much have the same age gap that drunkle and Jim did. Me and him are about 14 years apart, and Jim and drunkle, I believe, are about 11 years apart. So I didn't start to see that that's probably what my drunkle was doing, at the very least subconsciously, until I became a little bit older. From 13 to, I would say, 17, I just thought of it as cool. I get to drink. I don't have to spend money on it. We would usually do something cool, like we would go out to like Dave and Buster's, drink a little bit, and then play at the arcade, or we would go fishing, get drunk, and just fish forever long. I will say that if we were out fishing, since we would be out for a lot longer and we were just like on a boat in the lake, I would tend to drink a little bit more. But anyways, so I made the connection because we started to just talk a lot differently. Nothing predatory on his end, nothing that gave off molester rapey vibes, nothing along those lines. I just mean that the if you were to just listen to an audio of our conversations, you probably wouldn't be able to guess that it was between a niece and an uncle. You would have thought it was more of just long term friends, or you would probably picture that the conversation was happening between two men, not by a young girl and a grown man. Like if you couldn't listen to my voice, like if I had a voice changer that made my voice deeper, we would be talking about a very grown things that I had very little experience dealing with. I only had knowledge of these things either because of Drunkle or because other things I was exposed to in my life. For example, my Drunkle would open up to me about his relationship problems. And I'm not talking about surface level, oh, we fight a little bit too much, or I don't know, money is tight. I mean, he would tell me about sex life problems. He would tell me about the very violent physical fights they would get into. Depending on how fucked up he was, he may or may not tell me some very personal details about the particular girl that he was dating. I won't go into detail to that. I don't there's one girlfriend that I do remember her and I do remember meeting her, but I was very young when that was going on and when he would tell me some of these things. So I won't go into a lot of detail about the girlfriend, but I was having very adult conversations at a very young age. And this only got even more and more intense as time went on. Now, I didn't have a lot of experience with this. I didn't start dating until I was 19. So I didn't really have much to say. It would mainly be just him venting. And as I mentioned, it was pieces coming together in this weird fucked up puzzle that kind of made it more like, oh, he was trying to make me into the brother that he no longer has. So we would have these really deep conversations about things that were just out of my scope. Drunkle also has a very poor relationship with his biological father, who, not saying that he's a good person by any means, I am just stating that I can't remember meeting this guy. I have only heard multiple stories from when he was in my grandmother's life about how abusive he was, about just how horrible of a person he was. And I would have to listen to my drunkle rant about wanting to kill him, detailing the horrible things that his father did to him. And it would usually always go into how much he misses Jim, which that was the main part of the conversation where I could usually see it coming like after the first couple of times of being a part of it. I kind of knew when the time would come where he would bring up Jim, and I was usually able to shut it down, but there was a handful of times where despite me trying to shut it down, Drunkle would just get very emotional, basically crying, like actually losing control of his emotions. And I don't know how it didn't click for me sooner that he was clearly just missing Jim so much that he couldn't help but try to recreate whatever bond that they had with me. But again, hindsight 2020, that was those moments where he would break down crying were definitely signs that he couldn't see me and treat me and let me have the innocence of being his niece. He needed that replacement. He couldn't live with the fact that Jim was gone, And since he felt so guilty for Jim passing, and because I am Jim's only child, and fun fact, Jim was also adopted into this family. So I am the only one that's actually blood related to Jim. I do not view my I don't view my family as less of a family because I'm not blood related, but it's just another layer of just removal that I'm assuming my drunkle has because we're not even blood related and I'm Jim's only child, and my mom and Jim's side of the family don't have the best relationship. So I'm the only one that really has a connection to Jim, even though I don't like Jim myself. So as time goes on, I'm getting closer and closer to being an adult. And because of me getting older, my uncle was still keeping up with the same type of conversations, but because I'm going through my own things and I'm starting to voice my opinion, we wouldn't butt heads in the sense of arguing. Well, we did argue, and I did get into a couple of physical fights with Drunkle, mainly because he was talking shit about my mom during these drunk, ranting, venting conversations that would turn physical because you have a almost drunk teenager and then a completely fucked up, 30 something year old who's an emotional wreck and refuses to get help. So yeah, there was a couple of times where we did get into a physical fight, and I do remember at least the handful of times that I know for sure it got physical between us. But as I got older, I started to vocalize my opinions more and more that were against a Jim. Because, like I said, I would only really get defensive when Drunkle would talk about my mom. I felt guilty, I felt bad, so I didn't really say much against Jim because, he grieves too. Drunkle and Jim had a different relationship than Jim and me, and I didn't feel it was right to completely say or to tell my uncle that he was wrong when he just simply saw Jim differently. That may or may not make sense, especially because there was at the very least allegations that he molested me, even though he did, but on the legal level at the most they were just allegations. So I know some people may not understand why I even gave my uncle that grace, but y'all weren't there. So it's a much different feeling being with the person and seeing somebody that portrays and walks through life so macho, so tough, so unbothered, so fucking crazy, and to see him break down in front of me like that, to hold on to my like shoulders or my hands and tell me that he misses his older brother, and looking at me dead in the eyes, not blinking, but tears streaming down his face, telling me how much he hates himself for Jim dying. But the whole time he's not saying Jim, he's saying your father. Like in the drunk, scruffy, desperate voice, he would say your father. So in those moments, I couldn't bring myself to overly criticize Jim. I would usually keep it to myself, but as I got older and the more I started to remember about my childhood, the more I would talk to my mom about what she remembers from that time of my life or those times in my life, the more I started to get kind of annoyed that my drunkle still didn't see my point of view. So I'm seeing Drunkle less simply because I'm getting older, doing more things just by myself or with my boyfriend. I have more things going on. I'm working full time. I started college right after I graduated high school, so immediately I was swept up with that. So I had a lot more things going on. And because of that, naturally, I'm just not with my drunkle as much. And I think the time apart is what helped me the most kind of see through the fog and kind of understand, like, damn, like, it's kind of weird that my my own father that you claim to love and miss so much died from the very thing you're encouraging me to consume, not just like by myself, but with you. A person that would say that if I ever need somebody to get killed, like he would do it for me. I never taken him up on that offer, but he would always tell me, if anybody ever hurts you, I'll kill them for you. Because at the time, he wasn't going to be a dad. He is soon to be a dad, depending on when this is posted. He might already be a dad, but at the time, he had no kids. He didn't really have a lot to live for, quite frankly, and that's not me trying to sound horrible, but that's something that he told me himself. And that was one of his reasonings for always being so willing to kill someone for me. So it was just the irony of, you're willing to kill for me, but you're potentially killing me the same way that Jim killed himself. So time is whipping by. I eventually turned 21. And the realization of, damn, I've already been drinking for 8 years. This, me turning 21, doesn't even seem as like hyped, because I was already doing this. I did have a good 21st birthday, so it's not like I was just wallowing in sadness or anything like that. But it just didn't really feel like a milestone. I feel like a lot of people view 21st birthdays as a milestone. I didn't really view it the same way, because I was already talking about shit that 21-year-olds were talking about. I was already drinking like 21-year-olds were, and I already had a job like most 21-year-olds do. Well, what changed, at least for me with my drunkle, was that he was just more excited because now we could legally go out and drink together. And I forget exactly what it was, but I mentioned to him that I didn't mind trying to play pool. I'm not good at it, but I don't mind the activity of doing it, even though I'm not good at it. And he was so excited because he wanted to go to this pool hall, and he just could not shut up about the amazing bartender that he would see a lot when he would go to this particular pool hall. And it kind of hit me like, huh, you're just more excited because you just want to ride. You just want a permanent person that will always be willing to drink with you. And it was around sometime after I turned 21 that I really started to grasp and kind of unpack the past almost 10 years of me drinking with him. I didn't necessarily view it as innocent at the start because I knew that it was wrong, but it just felt more chill and more of just like us vibing out together, hanging out together. And then it turned into this weird, not parentified, because I don't feel like he parentified me, but he was just replacing his old drinking buddy with the mini version for me to become his new drinking buddy. Like Jim passed, I'm the only kid. Well, who better to take Jim's place than Jim's daughter? So I started to see the shift in how he viewed me. And that shift in that my viewpoint was already developing. I already started to feel like it was getting weird about what we would talk about, how excited he was that I would be willing to drink. I didn't see it as my cool uncle. I saw it as, oh my God, he's kind of pathetic. And it was a really, really strange thing to process, because my drunkle was always fun. He was the fun uncle. He always had something to show you. He always was excited to teach you something that you didn't even know that he knew. He was always quirky, always had these things going on. And it was really easy to overlook some of the shit things that he did, because at the end of the day, still a drunk. He still had a lot of problems. He still did a lot of fucked up shit. But it was easier, at least for me, not being as affected, at least I thought, not being as affected from his bad shit. That made it easier to overlook all the complaints that people would tell me about. Like his mom would complain to me about his behavior. I would hear my aunt complain about his behavior. Depending on what friend of his I was around, they would complain about his behavior. But it was easier for me to look over it because, well, he would let me shoot a BB gun. He would let me like go on hikes with him, and we would just shoot the shit and chill out. He would take me to bonfires, and I would meet all these people that are much older than me, and I would just chill out with, almost 30-year-olds when I'm just barely a teenager. And I didn't have to worry about them hurting me. I never felt unsafe. It was just chill. It wasn't until I got older, and I think he slipped more into the delusion that I am my father, so I will act like my father, kind of like a robot. Like he was trying to program me into being the drinking buddy that passed away. So my 22nd birthday is not when everything fell apart. Definitely not that. It's not, I maintained my job. I was maintaining school. It was just when I kind of hit a mental breaking point with booze, because I don't know why. There is nothing that happened. It was just a mind shift between it's just alcohol to, wow, like this really destroyed like my father's life, and I think maybe my uncle is trying to destroy my life in the same way, whether he realizes it or not. So I was able to still celebrate my birthday, my 22nd birthday. I still went out drinking, went to one of my favorite clubs, still had a great time with just my boyfriend and I. But days prior to that, I just realized how fucking insane everything that happened between Jim and I was. It sounded like I said Gemini. Jim and I was, and how weird and crazy my relationship was with my uncle. So I started to seek out support groups. I was looking into therapy and all that shit just so I could start to unpack more so than I already tried to with my mom. Just what exactly was going on between me being born to my 22nd birthday. And now that it's coming up on almost 2 years later, because I am about 23 and a half, I should say, sorry. I don't view my uncle Drunkle the same way. I definitely can see the uncle that I was supposed to have. I can see and I can listen to him talk about certain things and appreciate the wisdom that he has from being older. But for the most part, I look at how he became the person he became, and I try my best not to end up like that. I also try my best to not be the person that Jim became. And I ultimately learned that I should not be around Drunkle as much as I used to be and even wanted to be, because there's a big part of me that misses that dynamic, even though at times it was very intense, very odd, especially if you're not me and you're just listening to this. It doesn't sound normal, and it's not normal. It's definitely not. It's abnormal to most people, but to me that was my normal. And there is a big part of me that will forever miss that phase of my life where I could casually drink with my uncle and I could just talk to him about pretty much anything, and I was just me. He was just him. Even though there was parts that I kind of held my opinion back, for the most part I was just me and he was just him. And now that I'm not a teenager and I'm not currently buzzed, it's easier for me to see just how inverse that was. Or maybe not inverse is the right word, but just how upside down that dynamic was. I understood that if he truly loved and cared about me, I'm not saying that he doesn't, I do think he does in his own way. I do not think my Drunkle purposely, consciously tried to plan out and execute my downfall. I think in his own way, he was trying to show that he loved me. But what I call love and what he calls love is clearly different. Because if I have a niece, I would never let her drink in front of me, let alone supply it, especially at such a young age. So I had to learn that the way that he views taking care of me after I lose my father is very different from how I should be taking care of myself after I lost my father. No matter how many years have passed, how I was as a person before Jim passed, is different now. It's even though I didn't really like Jim and it was a very stressful time of my life, my whole life before he died, it does change you. It does change how you view the world, knowing that somebody that helped create you is gone. Like, I don't see him anymore. And I'm at the point where I don't really remember what he sounds like. I don't remember what he looks like. So I will always be a different person since I found out that he died. And I realized that the biggest distinction between my uncle and how he handles that versus how I handle that is that I have no desire to resemble Jim like that. And my drunkle is trying to fill that void in his life, and he wants somebody to replace Jim's position. And that's just not how I want to be. So, started drinking at 13. Took me almost a full decade to realize that my drunkle and I have a very strange relationship, and it was mainly because he was letting me drink since I was 13, and it took me a long time to fully unpack all the layers to that. And who knows, there might be more layers than what I've come across, but you don't know what you don't know. So I'll keep you guys updated if I ever discover more layers to my relationship with my drunkle. Thank you for listening to Surrounded by Addicts. Remember to take life one day at a time and to enjoy the little things in life. Stay tuned for the next episode.